Hey, everybody. It is Thursday, October 23rd. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And a heads up, we have a special extra podcast for some of you today. If you're a premium member, I had a chance to sit down with my former colleague at Fox News, Brett Baier. You might recognize him as the anchor of Special Report, longtime correspondent there for more than 2 decades. He has a new book out on Teddy Roosevelt. So we talked about American presidential history, but also talked about politics, his vantage point from Fox News on the Trump administration, his interviews with Trump. Some really interesting insights there, especially in light of the fact that he covered the Pentagon for a number of years. So we talk about the controversial move we've been talking about by the Pentagon to make networks and media outlets sign an agreement, essentially, not to report on anything they don't approve of. And notably, Fox was among the networks that walked out and said, we will not sign this deal. So I talked to Brett about that, as well as a whole bunch of political headlines and, of course, history. And again, that's only available to those of you Mo News Premium members. To sign up and get access to that, mo.news/premium.
Okay, now to the headlines. ICE raids hit the Big Apple, where federal agents went looking for illegal migrants.
This led to chaos on the streets of Lower Manhattan. Jill, we'll bring you the latest.
In international news, Russia testing nuclear weapons after the second Trump-Putin summit was shelved. Where things stand when it comes to ending the war, nearing its 4th year.
And Jill, some late news on Wednesday with the White House announcing new sanctions on Russia, pushing back here.
Meanwhile, the government shutdown, now the second longest in history.
And it came as one Democratic senator conducted a filibuster, Jill, getting close to that record Cory Booker set earlier this year.
Moshe, the story that just will not quit, redistricting. North Carolina becoming the 3rd state to approve new congressional maps. What kind of impact this could have in the midterm elections?
Yeah, Texas went first, then Missouri, now North Carolina. All states that have added Republican seats, it appears. And California looking to respond here with a big vote next month.
In business news, Amazon planning to replace more than 500,000 jobs with robots. But don't call them robots. They're going with what they think is a more friendly term, cobots.
Yeah, so we'll look at this Amazon proposal and what the company is saying about this New York Times report.
In other consumer news, how much prices are going up across the fashion industry. And a heads up to parents about some new toys coming to store shelves that some of your kids, I know mine, will be begging for. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Et tu, Brute. That's my clue.
All right, New York City, the latest Democratic city targeted by ICE raids. On Tuesday, a federal raid in the city's Chinatown neighborhood led to the arrests of 4 protesters and 9 migrants from West Africa, who the Department of Homeland Security says were in the United States illegally. And now the head of the federal ICE agency is warning New Yorkers to expect more of these types of crackdowns in the 5 boroughs as President Trump expands his mass deportation push to New York City. Back to Tuesday's raid, more than 50 federal agents swept through the busy Canal Street area where African vendors illegally sell bootleg goods like sunglasses and purses. Military-style trucks were escorted by armed federal agents in the area. Reports of the raid spread quickly on social media. Dozens of protesters came down to the area. A spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security said the agents were carrying out an enforcement operation against sellers of counterfeit goods when protesters, quote, were shouting obscenities, became violent, and obstructed law enforcement duties, including blocking vehicles and assaulting law enforcement. The NYPD said it was not involved. New York City Mayor Eric Adams said the city, quote, does not cooperate with federal law enforcement on civil deportations. Looking at the big picture here, though, New York's sanctuary city policies restrict its cooperation with the federal government when it comes to immigration enforcement. Back in March, Adams testified that fears of deportation and ICE raids would lead residents to avoid seeking treatment for medical emergencies or calling law enforcement when a crime occurs. But Adams has also aligned himself with some of Trump's immigration stances. The mayor has sounded the alarm about the ballooning cost to the city for providing shelter, food, and medical care for more than 100,000 migrants. That cost is estimated at $12 billion over 3 years.
So it's important to note here what Jill just said, that New York doesn't cooperate on civil deportations. Now, New York does cooperate on criminal deportation. So if it is an illegal migrant who has a criminal record, Adams has chosen to make this a city where there is cooperation. If that person has a criminal record here in the U.S., they work with ICE on that. In this case, it appears that they're going after these vendors. Jill, I lived in that neighborhood just a few blocks away. These guys have been on the streets there for decades, selling fake Gucci's, fake Louis Vuittons, a whole bunch of luxury goods. Now, those luxury goods makers have had an issue with this for years, but New York for years has been looking the other way, and now the feds are getting involved.
Dare I say I have a closet full of sunglasses from Canal Street. I always lose them, and so 3 for $15 is a pretty
Jill
good
makes
deal.
a good deal with these guys.
I haven't bought them in a while, but I was a regular on my walk home from the New York Stock Exchange.
Yeah, they set up on blankets there. Jill, it's gotten so out of control in recent years. Like, it's hard to even walk by a couple of those streets. So that was the center of this earlier this week. And we should note, while New York, at least under Adams, has had this cooperation on criminal matters, there are some cities, have declared sanctuary cities where there is no cooperation under any circumstances. We're talking about places like Chicago and LA. So it'll be interesting to see here how the mayoral election potentially changes things and whether that escalates things, because Zoran Mamdani, who's the front runner, who's promised to fight Trump at every turn, including on immigration raids, no cooperation, he vows, in any way, shape, or form, and what the potential response is. So whether this is a sign of things to come here will be a big question. Now, the Department of Homeland Security yesterday saying that, in all caps, New York's Canal Street is safer. And they posted an image with the various arrested migrants' faces in gemstones. Sort of an interesting image there. And the acting ICE director, Todd Lyons, says you will see an increase in ICE arrests. There are many criminal illegal aliens that have been released in New York specifically. And certainly, we've seen that case. It appears like we've seen across the country here, especially in recent months. They've been ratcheting up deportations, not just of criminal aliens, but also those who've committed the civil penalty of being here illegally or missing, a visa appointment or overstaying visas, etc. This was one of the subjects of the mayoral debate last night. So again, that's something we will watch unfold here in New York in the coming weeks and months. Trump has been asked repeatedly about how he's going to deal with Mamdani. So it appears this will only get more contentious if there's a Mamdani victory here. Of course, Andrew Cuomo trying for an underdog victory to be the next mayor of New York. And that's an election we'll be following here with just a couple of weeks to go. And one more thing before we leave this story, I do want to thank people in the Mo News community who sent us video and photos of the raid. We happen to have a lot of people who live in New York who follow us on Instagram. So thank you for messaging those images to us directly on Instagram. We then go ahead and verify them. And of course, we vet the video and then, talk to you about whether we can tag you, whether you want to be anonymous, and obviously make a point of protecting anonymity, especially when you request it on clips like these.
Now to the ongoing war in Ukraine, more than 3.5 years in, and it looks like it has no signs of stopping as Russian President Vladimir Putin engaged in some saber rattling on Wednesday, overseeing drills of the country's nuclear arsenal. The drills involved testing a triad of Russian nuclear forces. They could attack from air, land, and sea, including an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of hitting the United States. The tests came hours after President Trump canceled a planned meeting with Putin in Budapest, saying that he didn't want it to be a, quote, waste of time. Putin insisted that Wednesday's tests were planned prior to Trump canceling the Budapest summit.
The on again, off again, on again, off again relationship. Jill, late on Wednesday, the Treasury Department announced sanctions against 2 of Russia's biggest oil companies. Now, the U.S. hasn't bought Russian oil for a while now, but the hope is that the sanctions will also impact other countries that purchase Russian oil. We're looking at you, Europeans, as well as India and China potentially. So it appears, Trump has been trying carrots and sticks with Russia. Let me incentivize Putin. Let me hit Putin a couple times. And then recently they had this call where then they called for the second summit. Remember, there was that Alaska summit that Trump was very hopeful about. That didn't go very well. Then we went back to being very critical of Russia. Then there was a call with Putin again that led to the planning of a Budapest summit. Now that summit we learned earlier this week was canceled. And so now you had Putin engaged in this testing of his nuclear arsenal. That was very long planned. Nonetheless, Jill, they made a point of firing a missile that could hit the U.S. Putin has a history of doing this. We should note Russia does have the world's largest nuclear arsenal, more than 5,000 known nuclear warheads. Number 2 is the U.S. With our nuclear arsenal. Since the Russian invasion back in 2022, Putin has issued a number of nuclear threats. It got very serious, actually, during the Biden administration where, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, the U.S. had to go to India as an intermediary being like, hey, can you call Putin and tell him to calm down? Because like we're actually getting concerns he might actually try to use some small tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So that was one of the crises we saw back in 2022, 2023. It appears here like, Putin is, the term is saber rattling, right? Like, showing off his goods there as a potential threat there, as a negotiating device. And so we will see what happens next here. And it really just wavers day by day. But the actual sanctions here come from the Treasury Department, a pretty significant move.
Meanwhile, Russia also launched a missile and drone attack on Ukraine on Tuesday night, killing at least 6 people, including 2 kids. Dozens of others were injured. Those missiles hitting a kindergarten in the city of Kharkiv. It's the second largest city in Ukraine. Dozens of kids were in attendance at the time. So Russia clearly not slowing down at all in its military assault on Ukraine.
No, I mean, going back to that failed Alaska summit, Putin's really been ratcheting things up. Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, saying the latest attack proves Russia, quote, does not feel enough pressure for prolonging the war. Remember, Trump said last week, Putin, I might give Tomahawk missiles to the Ukrainians. Those are missiles that can go deep into Russia, offensive weapons. And then there was the meeting on Friday that didn't go very well, where then Trump had a fight with Zelensky. Again, it's been a roller coaster following this story and the various diplomatic maneuvers and then getting close to Ukraine and then, being friendlier to Russia here. It still comes down to this. Is there a deal for parts of Ukraine to go to Russia and in exchange for having to give some of that land to the Russians, which currently occupy about 20% of Ukraine? Will Ukraine get the guarantees that Putin, that this is the last war on Ukraine, that Putin will not try to invade again once he's able to rearm and sort of reset things with his military in the coming years?
Time for the speed read, starting with the latest on the government shutdown, now the second longest in history. From CNBC, the government shutdown as of today is entering its 23rd day, becoming the second longest federal funding lapse ever. And there is no end in sight. This milestone means that the 2 longest shutdowns have both happened while President Trump was in office. The longest shutdown started in December of 2018 in Trump's first term. It dragged on for 35 days. This shutdown is about 2 weeks short of breaking that record at the moment. So that shutdown, if you remember, stemmed from a dispute about funding Trump's contentious border wall. The current shutdown, as we've been reporting, has resulted from Senate Democrats refusing to vote for a short-term government funding bill sponsored by Republicans because it doesn't have additional spending to help make healthcare insurance more affordable and some other provisions. Democrats want any funding bill to extend enhanced tax credits under the Affordable Care Act. They say without it, health insurance premiums for millions of Americans could go up significantly next year. Republicans hold a 53-47 majority in the Senate. 60 votes are needed to pass any funding bill. A stopgap funding resolution that previously passed in the GOP-controlled House has now failed to pass in the Senate 11 times. And then on Wednesday, things were put on hold by Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley.
Yes, one of the longest filibusters in history. If you remember, there was that Cory Booker filibuster earlier this spring that lasted just over 25 hours. Well, Merkley went 22 hours and 39 minutes on the floor, beginning on Tuesday night and ending just after 5 p.m. on Wednesday. Merkley's goal was to lay out his issues with the Trump administration. He accused the president of, quote, shredding our Constitution. Here's a bit of Merkley's filibuster.
To the floor tonight to ring the alarm bells. We're in the most perilous moment, the biggest threat to our republic since the Civil War.
Merkley used a lot of signs as part of the filibuster. He had one that read, ring the alarm bells, authoritarianism is here now. And the goal of these filibusters, it doesn't change much, but when you're in the minority in Congress, which right now Democrats are in the minority both in the Senate and the House, there's not much you can do. The one thing you can do in the Senate is call attention to issues by having these record-long speeches, because these guys give speeches all the time. Most of them don't get coverage. sometimes it's hard to find clips or transcripts, even unless you go to like the Twitter pages or the social media pages of the various senators. So the point of, when people asked about this, of a filibuster going for 22 hours, it's just like, oh, wow, that's a long time. And so you then get some media coverage for your cause there. As for the shutdown here, Jill, it doesn't appear clear that any side wants to blink right now. Democrats feel that they have the wind at their backs on an issue like healthcare insurance, given the cost of it and the increasing price of it for the average American, especially since so many Republican voters will also be impacted by insurance premiums going up at the end of the year. And then Republicans see no reason to concede to Democrats right now. So this could potentially break the record from 2018, 2019. Remember the thing that brought that to resolution. The air traffic controllers stopped showing up to work because they weren't getting paid. This time around, of course, they're not getting paid either. They're still showing up to work. How long that'll last, TBD.
From the Charlotte Observer, Republicans in North Carolina have approved a new congressional map that could give the GOP another red-leaning congressional seat next year. It is part of a growing White House-backed redistricting push that is reshaping the 2026 political landscape. This latest map brings the total to 7 new GOP-leaning seats nationwide since 2024, following similar efforts in Texas, which added 5 Republican seats. Missouri just added 1. Several more states are under pressure to redraw before next year's midterms. The redistricting wave comes as both parties look for every possible advantage ahead of what's expected to be another razor-thin battle for control of Congress. Republicans say they're responding to heavily gerrymandered blue states like Illinois and Maryland, accusing Democrats of tilting maps in their favor for decades. Democrats, meanwhile, call this the next phase of a coordinated Republican strategy to lock in power through the courts and state legislatures.
Yeah, what's notable about this is not that there's gerrymandering, which is the term for redrawing congressional districts in a way that favors your party. This goes back to the beginning of the 19th century. In fact, a guy named Elbridge Gerry, who was the governor of Massachusetts, is who this is named after, though we now call it gerrymandering, even though he pronounced his name Gary. But I digress. The point of all this is legally, constitutionally, this can happen every 10 years. There's a census in a year that ends in 0, right? There's a census in 1990, 2000, 2010, and the most recent in 2020. And after that census, you get a sense of the population in all 50 states. And then each state has a different protocol for how they redraw the district, saying we lost people, we gained people, people moved here, people moved there, and you redraw the districts, and typically the party in charge redraws districts in their favor. What is notable here is this is happening mid-decade. There was a census in 2020. All the states redrew their districts. And now it's not even 2030 yet. We're halfway through the decade, but you've seen a big push from President Trump and Republicans who are like, we don't like the way that things have been redrawn. You need to redraw them again. And so you've seen amenable states, Republican states like Texas, like Missouri, and in this case, the latest case, North Carolina, redraw the districts to redraw out Democrats and draw in Republicans. And again, as Jill mentioned, Republicans say, well, you guys have been gerrymandering. And the thing is, like, yes, both sides have been gerrymandering, and there are some crazy gerrymandered states, Illinois being one of them for Democrats. Now, increasingly, you see red states like Tennessee, Ohio's looking at other redistricting, where you see states, when you look at the percentage of Republicans and Democrats in the state versus the percentage of Republican or Democratic congressional seats, that's where you see the difference. That's not necessarily representative of the population. So this is gerrymandering on crack happening here at the behest here of the Trump administration. And now Democrats are looking to push back. In California in particular, if you're a California voter, you will have Prop 50 on your ballot in November. And right now, polling shows that that's going to pass. What that means is that basically is going to freeze the current map, allow the heavily Democratic state legislature to redraw the map, and Democrats believe they can gain 5 seats in California. But right now, Republicans are +7 between Texas, Missouri, and North Carolina. The White House is also putting pressure on Indiana to draw out a Democrat and add a Republican seat. And then, of course, there's the Voting Rights Act that's come before the Supreme Court. That's a major case. That could lead to the loss of some Democratic seats here. So Democrats are freaking out right now about what could happen and how much more challenging it'll be to try to win back the U.S. House next year. It is a slim margin, but these seats are adding to sort of room for Republicans to be able to hold the U.S. House. Now, Prop 50, if it passes in California, that'll be a big win for Democrats, and that's something we're going to watch here. By the way, one small quirk for those of you in North Carolina who are like, how can this happen in North Carolina? The governor is a Democrat. You are right. But the Democratic governor has no power to veto the map. There's a quirk in North Carolina law there. So the legislature is Republican, the governor is Democrat, but ultimately he can't block this. So it appears +1 for Republicans in North Carolina.
Mosh, now to your interview with Fox News host Brett Baier. He is out with a new book about Teddy Roosevelt. You talked about that and also the current presidential administration. Baier has been in D.C. for decades, and he has interviewed President Trump about half a dozen times. So I know you guys talked about Trump's media strategy, where he said that Trump sees provocative messaging as a PR win. So basically, all news is good news. And he also says that despite Trump's combative relationship with the mainstream media, we know he has called news outlets fake news, and he has sued media outlets for billions of dollars. Baier says that he still takes a lot of off-the-record calls with reporters from those same outlets.
It's working the phones all the time, Jill. You might be shocked to know that this includes the New York Times and NBC and fake news CNN and enemy of the state, ABC. Trump is constantly working the phones with reporters from the right and from the left and from mainstream media outlets. It was a fascinating conversation. Brett's a former colleague. I started my career out at Fox News. I was there between 2004, 2009. That's when Brett was the Pentagon correspondent and then the White House correspondent before he would go on in 2009 to become the anchor of Special Report, where he's been for the good decade and a half now. And so, we talked also specifically about his time at the Pentagon, and in particular, Fox News's move not to sign that agreement the Pentagon tried to require all the media to sign to only effectively report on approved things. And so the Times walked out, the Post walked out, CNN walked out, ABC walked out, on and on and on. Fox News walked out, even Newsmax, which is even to the right of Fox News, walked out. Brett talking a bit about that. So look for that on the premium podcast today. We'll eventually put it out as well for all of you on the general podcast. As for Trump and the media strategy, some interesting thoughts here from Brett on that. Here's a bit of what he had to say.
He knows the power of informing where his head is. And those reporters, I hope, understand the power of those off-the-record conversations.
Brett also talked about just misconceptions about Trump, given he spent a lot of time with him, including Jill flying on Air Force One with Trump to that Putin summit we mentioned earlier in the podcast. He mentioned that he had to go and sleep at one point, but Trump was up the entire time, constantly engaged on phone calls. So he's just I can't believe the amount of energy this guy has. But we talk about, Trump and his impact on a democracy, the First Amendment, executive authority. I think it's a really interesting conversation for all of you. And we also talk about Teddy Roosevelt, the subject of his new book. It's Baier's 6th presidential biography, and interesting comparisons, Jill, between Teddy Roosevelt and Donald Trump, both surviving assassination attempts, both expanding the White House. As we've been talking about Trump building a ballroom, Teddy was the guy who built the West Wing. But Jill, just also in terms of their character, these sort of New York outsiders, these guys who really knew how to play the media, Teddy Roosevelt taking the media with him as he was with the Rough Riders. So, knowing the media of the time, taking print reporters with him on horseback, of course, Trump, using X and other items, but a lot of interesting comparisons between Teddy and Donald that we get into in the podcast. So look out for that on the Mo News Premium feed today. Mo.news/premium to join. Mo.news/premium.
Okay, now to a business story from the New York Times. Over the past 2 decades, Amazon has helped shape the future of the U.S. workplace, becoming the nation's 2nd largest employer behind Walmart. It has hired hundreds of thousands of warehouse workers, built an army of contract drivers, and pioneered using technology to hire, monitor, and manage employees. But now some interviews and internal strategy documents viewed by the New York Times show that Amazon execs believe that the company is on the cusp of its next big workplace shift, replacing more than 500,000 jobs with robots. Amazon's U.S. workforce has more than tripled since 2018 to almost 1.2 million. But the automation team expects the company can avoid hiring more than 160,000 people that it would otherwise need by 2027, and that is just in the United States. It would save about 30 cents on each item that Amazon picks, packs, and delivers to customers. Execs told Amazon's board last year that they hoped robotic automation would allow the company to continue to avoid adding to its workforce in the coming years, even as they plan to sell twice as many products by 2033.
Right. So in the next 8 years, they're going to double the amount of products they send out, but not have to hire a single additional person. According to one estimate, that would translate to more than 600,000 people Amazon won't need to hire. Now, a spokesperson for Amazon told the New York Times, the Times revealing that they had these documents, that these documents only reflect the viewpoint of one group inside the company, that Amazon still plans to hire more than 250,000 people this coming holiday season alone, though the company declined to say how many of those roles would be permanent. Now, remember, this is something that came up, Jill, during our recent visit to an Amazon facility where I asked about, this conundrum between, being cheaper and faster for the consumer, but also, continuing to employ human beings alongside AI. And so it appears here they're having these ongoing discussions based on what the New York Times reveals in this story. They have a new advanced facility apparently in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is a template for future robotic fulfillment centers. Once an item there is in a package, a human barely touches it again. And documents show that Amazon's robotics team has the ultimate goal of 75% of its operations being similar to that. So ultimately here, the discussion happening internally at America's second largest employer, similar to, happening across the board with the advent here of agentic AI, more advanced AI that can basically replace humans, from law firms to media organizations to hospitals to Amazon. How will humans coexist with AI? What new roles will be created and what roles here will be eliminated?
From CNBC, prices are rising across the fashion industry, with jackets and outerwear seeing the steepest year-over-year increases. A new report from the consulting firm Alex Partners looks at how much prices have climbed between 2024 and 2025, from swimsuits to dresses. So prices in all categories have risen by an average of about $17 year over year. But jackets and outerwear saw the largest increase, with prices on average 24% higher. Swimwear saw the smallest hike at 2% on average.
So swimsuits not up, outerwear up. One of the issues here, tariffs. We've told you about all the various companies that produce their clothing abroad. And then, Jill, there's also a late start to fall, which typically leads to a weak demand for outerwear. If the temperature stays warm, you don't need, that extra jacket or this extra couple of sweaters. Sweater weather. I think we've hit sweater weather. I'm saying it like Saturday Night Live. Sweater weather. I think we've hit it in New York, though.
At least in the morning. In the morning
Yes.
and at night. The afternoon gets hot.
Yeah, we're in one of those situations. Layers are like key right now because we're like beginning the day at 49 degrees and heading up to 6 degrees. I don't know what it's like where you are, but ultimately that's one of the interesting things when people often talk about climate change and stuff. Ultimately, the impact here goes across the board, across the economy, including clothing manufacturers, right? So having a hard time moving product in the fall could lead to inventory challenges because all these companies trying to make certain bets on how much and what type of clothing they'll sell.
Right. And we're just a few weeks from the season where everyone expects very steep discounts. Black Friday's in about a month from now.
All your fall goods will get on sale, and then you'll be able to use them in the spring for Sweater Weather 2, Revenge of the Sweater Weather.
And finally, a quick heads up to parents from Reuters. Netflix is partnering with Hasbro and Mattel to bring K-pop Demon Hunters toys to shelves. This animated film debuted on Netflix back in June. It's become Netflix's most popular film of all time, with more than 325 million views worldwide. Its popularity has spurred Netflix to release it twice in theaters, once in August for a 2-day weekend event, and again next week around Halloween. Get your tickets.
Now, partnering with Mattel and Hasbro will allow Netflix to offer a suite of consumer products based around the film. It appears Mattel will handle dolls, action figures, accessories, and playsets, while Hasbro will focus on plush, electronics, and board games, among other things. This was an announcement earlier this week. Now, there will be some overlap in product categories between the two toy makers. As of right now, it does not appear like any of them will be ready for Christmas, though they will be starting pre-sales in the coming weeks here. Merchandise and toys will be available for retail in the spring. So maybe you can tell your kids, I bought you some presents. They're not going to be under the Christmas tree this December, but they will be there in time for the spring. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in the year 42 BC. Yes, more than 2,000 years ago. On this day, it is believed that Brutus, The leading conspirator in the assassination of Julius Caesar died by suicide after his defeat in a battle. Just 2 years before, Brutus had been part of the plot to kill the Roman dictator Julius Caesar. Remember the line in Shakespeare, "Et tu, Brute, and you, Brute?" Well, Brutus thought that killing Caesar would lead to the restoration of the Roman Republic. He was wrong, though. It would actually plunge Rome into further chaos, lead to a civil war, and then Brutus would take his own life as he loses that war. Just a few years later, the Roman Republic would be lost forever with the beginning of the emperorship of Augustus Caesar. Fast forward a couple millennia. On this day in 1941, the Disney animated movie Dumbo had its world premiere. Back to some more serious news here. On this day in 1983, suicide bombers drove truckloads of high explosives into the barracks of the U.S. Marines and French paratroopers in Beirut, killing 241 servicemen, 58 French troops. Ultimately, the deadliest day for the Marines since World War II. Iranian bombers, an unknown group at the time called Islamic Jihad, eventually would be part of Hezbollah, would be responsible for it. Notably, Reagan didn't do much, President Reagan, in terms of a response there. He ended up pulling the U.S. troops out of Lebanon. And of course, we've been covering the Iranian role in Lebanon as well as Hezbollah in the decades since. On this day in 2001, Apple releases the iPod, the iconic iPod, a portable media player. This predates, for those of you who aren't old enough, the iPhone. Back in the day, we used to have separate cell phones that didn't have much in the way of capabilities beyond making calls and text messages, and then iPods as mobile listening devices. And then eventually they would all merge into one in the iPhone. And finally, in music history, two iconic songs out on this day. On this day in 1978, Gloria Gaynor releases her song, "I Will Survive." And in 1998, on this day, 27 years ago, Britney Spears with "Hit Me Baby One More Time."
Moshe, we got the classic line, "Oops, I did it again." And we did it again. Thank you guys for listening to another edition of the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. The reviews really do help.
And if you value our coverage and value independent media, please support us by joining Mo News Premium. Some of you, I know, would love that coverage. We do weekend news coverage, exclusive podcasts. As I mentioned, the Brett Baier podcast is out today for premium users first. We also have exclusive weekly podcasts there that only go to premium users, where you ask me questions, ask Mo anything, and I do deep dives into a variety of subjects that we cover in this podcast that you're looking to learn more about. I also do some hot takes over there as well. There's a lot of other features to Mo News Premium. Check it out again over at mo.news/premium, just $9 a month or $100 a year to support independent media and get a whole bunch of additional content, analysis, and insight from here at Mo News. We'll see you guys back here tomorrow.
This is Leah. Thank you for listening from Mo Pocket with Mom and Dia.